Welcome to one more edition of Politics and Right. I'm Egberto Willis, your host. He discovered many, including Jennifer Lopez, Liam Neeson, Kerry Washington, Jerry Seinfeld, William H. Macy, Jason Alexander, Connie Britton, Jacqueline Smith, David Strayhorn, Bob Barker. Yeah, that's who we're talking to. Chick Hearn, and many more. He charted his own course in Hollywood to the disdain of many, and he succeeded like no other. He has now encapsulated that drive and knowledge in one place, his book titled American Original. Let's do launch. A Hollywood agent dishes on how to make your business and career take off. Irrespective of your profession, his path is one that is synonymous to success. Maybe there are some pointers in there for you. So today we're honored to have, who is this guy we're talking about? Harry Abrams. Good morning, Harry. How you doing this morning, my brother?
I'm doing terrific. Good to talk to you, Alberto.
Well, you know, when I heard about what you came up with, let me tell you the Karen that I got. It said, "Meet legendary Hollywood agent Harry Abrams, an American original." So I tell you what. First of all, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, I'm living here in Los Angeles, although I spent 20 years of my career in New York City. I was born here. I was born in Kansas City, Missouri. My folks came west when I was a couple of years old, so I'm really a California native. I went to school here in LA. I ended up at UCLA. I was a pre-med student for 2 years, and then an unusual thing occurred that caused me to change my major from pre-med to business. I've always been intrigued with the entertainment industry. I actually came close to going to work at 20th Century Fox for the famous man who founded 20th Century Fox, Spiros Skouras, but that's a story, another story, if we want to get into that. I always wanted to get in the entertainment industry, but I didn't. I had no connections. I come from a very poor family. I have my mother and father are gone now, but I have three sisters. Two of them are gone. I've still got one who's still with us, and they were very poor. My mom and dad, and I had to do things all on my own. I had to start from scratch, and I started. My father couldn't afford to give me an allowance when I was growing up as a kid, and so I had to go out and earn my own money. And I started a paper route when I was about 9 or 10 years of age, and that graduated into eventually, after about a year, into a paper corner where I sold papers on the corner of Pico and La Brea here in Los Angeles, which is a famous intersection. I wanted to get in the entertainment industry. I had no contacts, but I had learned how to write a letter of inquiry about looking for a job. When I graduated from UCLA, I went in the military. I was a ROTC, so I was a commissioned officer in the military for the Medical Service Corps, stationed in San Antonio, Texas, at Fort Sam Houston. I spent 6 months in the active duty, and then 7.5 years of reserve. I stayed with the reserve that 7.5 years, eventually moving up from a commissioned officer as a second lieutenant to eventually a first lieutenant, and then eventually became a captain. I resigned my commission with the U.S. Army, and after 8 years, I finished my commitment, and looking for a job, and wanted to get in the entertainment industry. I had written a letter. I didn't have any contacts in the agency business, talent agency business, but talked to a lot of different people, read a lot of books, decided that the talent agency business was where I wanted to start. I didn't know whether eventually I'd end up being motion picture production, television production, theatrical theater production, or just what aspect. I certainly had no artistic talent. I wasn't a performer. I didn't write. I didn't sing. I didn't compose music. I was not a director. I decided I wanted to be on the business side of it, and that's what I pursued. And I wrote these letters to a couple of different talent agencies that I found out had training programs. And fortunately, one of the things I learned in my business schooling at UCLA was how to write a letter of introduction, how to write a letter of inquiry. And I was able to get interviews with the two talent agencies, both of which had training programs. And I started working at MCA. I was paid $40 a week.
Oh.
I left a job in Richmond, Indiana, where I was working for a power lawnmower company while I was waiting for my name to rise to the top of the list at these two talent agencies. Because once you had an interview with them, if you were fortunate enough to get an interview, you had to then wait till your name rose to the top of the list. There were a lot of people ahead of you, and it took about a year, maybe almost a year and a half, for a name to rise to the top of the list. And finally, I got the call from the William Morris agency. It was the first agency that called me, and I had during my interview process that I had with William Morris, my interview process with MCA, I met with not only met the human resources director, although they called them personnel directors in those days. I also had to meet with several of the agents in the different departments to see whether they would approve me to enter their training program. That training program started paid at $40 a week. And I was working in Richmond, Indiana for this power lawnmower company while I was waiting for my name to rise to the top of the list. And it was about a year and a half, or maybe a little under a year and a half. I got the call to come to work, and I was then making $125 a week in Richmond, Indiana. And the owner of the company, I told him I was going to leave and go back to Los Angeles. He was very upset with me. He flew in from New York. That's where he was based, and took me to dinner and offered to raise my pay, double my pay to $250 a week. And I said, his name was Maury Lober, who was the owner.
In those days, $250 a week was a lot of money.
It was a tremendous amount of money.
Yeah.
And I quit that. I'm sure he had second questions about my intelligence. When I said I was leaving job, $250 a week to go to work for $40 a week, but my heart was set on the entertainment industry, and so that's what happened. I can go on and on and on for a couple of hours here, Edberto.
No, but let me just ask you this, because now in those days, that's how it worked, right? You threw yourself. They had a training program. They selected whether they thought you could do good in that training program. You qualified for that training program. When your time came up, your quota or whatever you want to call it, you got the call, you went out there, and then the training began. Now, after your training was over, did they just unleash you? How do talent agencies work? Do they unleash you to just look for people, or what?
Well, at this particular agency, which was called MCA Artists, it stood for Music Corporation of America. When you work in the training program, you start working in the mailroom for $40 a week, and eventually you get to know all of the agents in the company because you come in contact with them all the time, delivering their mail, picking up their mail, distributing the mail, and running errands and delivering scripts and driving around the city, et cetera, to studios and networks. And anyway, you get to know the agents in the different departments. And in this particular department, which was the radio and television department of MCA, there were a couple of guys who I got to know very well because I did a lot of work for them. And eventually they offered me a position to leave the mailroom and to go to work as an assistant to the two of them in their department. And that's how I got started. And that's how one moves out of the training program into it. You're still in training, but now you got an honest job.
You finally got the pathway to being an official agent.
Yeah, I was on the way. I was on the path. Right.
Now, I gave you that when I started the program. I talked about all these different stars that you interacted with, and in fact, that you are the one that initially brought them into the Hollywood domain. When did you get to the level where you started discovering this kind? What did you do as an agent, talent agent, to find these people?
Well, eventually, after I had worked as an assistant for a year or two for these two guys, I was then elevated to becoming an agent at MCA, a full-time agent. And then I was able to solicit talent or try to bring talent into the agency and also sell the talent of the talent agency as well. And I stayed, and I did that in the radio and television and commercials department, radio and television commercials, radio and television advertising, dealing with networks and radio stations and television stations and advertising agencies. I mean, that was a specific direction or a specific area. I wasn't really dealing with motion picture studios. I wasn't dealing with independent motion picture producers or Broadway or theatrical producers or television producers. And I stayed in that specialized area until MCA went out of business. And they went out of business, I think, in 1962. They were judged in violation of the Sherman-Clayton Antitrust Act. They'd become a monopoly. The famous man, Lou Wasserman, ran MCA, and he bought Universal Pictures for several $1 million, and he found himself, MCA was now in the motion picture television production business, and they were buying all their talent from MCA, from their talent agency. They were buying their artistic talent, all of it.
So it was a closed loop.
It was a closed loop, and there were several other agencies like the William Morris Agency, an agency called ICM, that was a very large agency, and several other agencies that objected to this and eventually filed a lawsuit against them with the U.S. government, claiming they were in violation of the Sherman-Clayton Antitrust Act. They were a monopoly, and that they should be stopped from doing that. And that case, the wheels of justice grind out very slowly. You've heard that before. And it took about a year and a half, 2 years to get through all of the various and sundry legal agencies, et cetera. And it was during Jack Kennedy's administration as the president of the United States. His brother was Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General.
Attorney General, yeah.
Of the United States. And it was in 1964 that, I think it was 1964. I've forgotten that sometimes these years. But yes, that was when it was. They were found guilty, MCA, and they were forced by the U.S. government. They received a directive from the government, said either you stay in the talent agency business or you stay in motion picture and television.
One or the other.
One or the other. And they chose to go into the production side because the amount of money that had been earned in the prior year was maybe I don't know, a couple $100 million in.
Right. So
Uh, Go ahead. Sorry.
let me ask you this then. So what is the, I mean, and in your book, you give pathways that you took. What would you consider the thing that allowed you to pull down so many talents? What within yourself and your upbringing, you think, brought you to be able to bring the kinds of talents that you brought? I mean, they're diverse and they're many.
Well, I had I always had a fascination with the entertainment industry, as I said to you. I grew up watching motion pictures, and I became very enamored of the theater, and I would attend the theater regularly. Local 99 seat, what they call equity waiver theater, Broadway theater, large houses, the Hollywood Bowl was big theater, uh, uh, a lot of theaters in Los Angeles, and I spent 20 years in New York. I went to all the Broadway theaters, and I would watch it. I watch a talent. I'd listen to them. I'd watch them up on stage, and in my opinion, I felt they had a talent, or their artistry was of such a nature that I wanted to represent them. Well, 99% of them were already represented. So I had to find those talents that were not represented, that were not necessarily beginners, but didn't have satisfactory talent agency representation. And I'd approach them. I'd go and talk to them about the representation. And that's how it was my own taste, I think, that led me to them. Plus, I'd also worked in the theater when I was a child. My mother had me work in the theater for a while. She thought maybe I'd become a motion picture actor or whatever. But, so I always had an interest in working in the entertainment industry. So I hope that answered your question.
No, of course. I mean, you're saying that it is your own taste that you looked when you saw these people. You actually looked at the things that you thought entertained you, and you thought, well, if it entertains me, it likely would quite a few others. And yeah, if the list of people that you represent, that says it all. You said it is said that your book is filled with stories about your entertainment pursuits. Do you have a whole lot of anecdotes about some of your catches, if you will? Tell us a couple of them.
Well, one of them was I don't know if you ever heard of the actor Eddie Albert, Green Acres.
Yes, of course.
He was a star of that show. Anyway, he was a client of MCA's, and I dealt with I mentioned to you advertising agencies and the advertising agency for Lipton Tea, the Thomas J. Lipton Company, was sponsoring the Democratic Convention, 1964, in Los Angeles. And the creative director from that advertising agency, who I had come to know over the years and I'd done a lot of work with selling him talent previously, he called me one day from New York. I was living in LA. He said, listen, our client Lipton Tea is going to be one of the sponsors on the show, and they're looking for a name, celebrity, or personality to deliver the commercial. 60 in those days, it was 60-second television commercials. But wanted to deliver the commercial live. In other words, they were not going to pre-tape it and looking for some celebrity or personality. Do you have anyone? Now, I had sold talent to these people before. So I said, well, we have a lot of stars at MCA, but I don't necessarily know them personally. They all have their own, what they call point agents. But let me see if I can collect a group of names. I got off the phone, talked to my associates, and I came up with a few names. And one of the names I came up with was Eddie Albert. Eddie Albert was a star in those days from Green Acres.
Oh, yeah.
And I proposed the name of Eddie Albert to the advertising agency, and the ad agency said, gee, they went to their client, which was Lipton Tea and Thomas J. Lipton Company. They said, great, we'd love to have him deliver our 60-second commercial, one commercial per night, 5 nights to the Democratic Convention. And we'd love to have him deliver our 60-second commercial. Do you think he'll do it? So they asked me that question. I said, I don't know. You pay him enough money, I'm sure he'll do just about it. So I went to Eddie Albert's point agents because I didn't know Mr. Albert at all. And he said the same thing that I said was, well, if you pay enough money, perhaps he'll be interested. So I ended up getting a 6-figure offer, which was pretty substantial in those days. It was all he had to do was one 60-second commercial live,
5 days.
5 days, yeah.
And in the 60s, he got a 6 figures for that. Wow.
I was a good negotiator.
I guess you were.
So what happened was we made Eddie Albert had never done commercials before, and he said, well, it's kind of interesting. Pay 6 figures. Why the hell not? And so I went the first night to the where they were doing this, the Los Angeles Convention Center, where they had the Democratic Convention. I went there to be with him, to give him support, to let him know I was interested. And there was someone from his side of the fence there, where everyone else was on the other side of the fence. So he delivered the 60-second television commercial live in front of several million people around, not only around
the whole country, yeah.
Not only the country, but around the globe. And I thought he did a great job. I went home that night. I get a telephone call at 11:30 at night. Harry, this is Eddie Albert. Yes, Mr. Albert, what can I do for you? He said, I hated it every minute that I did that. I hated it. Like it was like poison. I don't really want to continue. I can't do it. I just don't feel, well, but you did such a great job. Doesn't matter. I'm a professional, but I'm not about to work for the next 4 nights. I said, well, Mr. Albert, you can't do that.
You have a contract.
I negotiated half your money was paid to you up front, which was the case before you did the other half was to be paid to him at the end of the 5 days. He had signed a contract. The Lipton Tea people had signed a contract. Anyway, make a long story short, he said, well, Harry, you got to get me out of it. You just got to, you work for MCA, for Christ's sake, get me out of it. I don't want to go, I'm not going to show up tomorrow. Well, needless to say, I didn't sleep that night. I wake up at 7:30 in the morning. The next morning, I get a phone call. It's the creative director from the advertising agency saying, Harry, I spent the past hour on the telephone with our client. They don't like the job that Mr. Albert does, and they don't want to continue on with him. I said, What do you mean you don't want to continue on with him? Are you out of your mind? He's been in front of millions of people around the world. His reputation will be destroyed if he doesn't appear for the next 4 nights. All right, I don't care what you have to do, but you gotta get us out of the contract. Now, of course, I didn't say anything to them.
Right.
And I said to them we spent about half an hour on the phone, me arguing with them, trying to persuade them the contrary. They were not about to change. And I said, listen, I'll tell you what, I'll go back to Mr. Albert and see if I can persuade him to change his mind. But there are certain conditions that I'll want. Number one, I want to check for the other half of the, if I'm able to persuade him, I want to check for the other half of the money on my desk immediately tomorrow. Number two, I want, the second thing I want you to guarantee to me that you will allow me to bring to your to bring to you someone else to sell to do the next 4 nights of the television commercials. And the creative director in New York said to me, Harry, anything you want, just get us out of the contract. And I'm not, this is 100% correct. And what happened was, obviously, I went to Mr. Albert and told him I was successful in getting him out of the contract. And besides that, I'm going to get you the other half of your money. You're going to have that tomorrow. He said, he called me Harry Houdini.
Yeah, that is Harry Houdini, all right. That is so. I mean, so that gave you that also taught you how to, I guess, play some poker.
Well, I've played poker all my life.
So that's what you did. You used your poker skills to win that battle. But anyway, we're getting up in time here. Give me. I have one last question. There is Jennifer Lopez, Liam Neeson, and Kerry Washington. What was your technique to get 3 people so different under your agency?
In the case of Jennifer Lopez, I discovered her on she was appearing on a television program called In Living Color.
A Fly Girl, yeah.
She was a fly girl.
Right.
Keenan Ivory Wayans was the host of the show.
Right.
And she was a fly girl. And I had MCA, we had another actor who was an unknown actor working on the show at the same time. So every week I would go to the show. And our agency at the time was looking for they needed a Hispanic girl who was attractive and who could speak Spanish, obviously. So I'd known about this. I'd heard about this from the commercial department. And so I approached her, introduced myself, and said, I'd like to have you come into the agency and speak with our agents about representation. But she was delighted to, because she was a fly girl.
Right.
A girl means a dancer, by the way, to those people who don't know what a fly girl is. And that's all she did. And we took her on for representation, and the rest is history.
The rest is. And what about Liam Neeson?
Liam Neeson. One of the things that I did after I built my career in Los Angeles, I opened an office in New York, and I had people stay in Los Angeles who were employed by my company. And when I lived in New York, I was much closer to London. So I would go over to London 3 or 4 times a year, just to not only see theater, but to keep my eye out for actors. And I established relationships with many, maybe 5 to 7 to 10 different theatrical agents over there, different companies, small agencies, independent agencies. And one of them was owned by a man by the name of Norman Boyack. And Norman said to me on one of my trips, he says, Harry, I've got this young actor. He's unknown. He's just shot an independent feature film. And his name is Liam Neeson. And he's from Ireland originally. He's Irish. And I'd like you to take a look at him, see if you're interested in him. I said, well, why don't you set up a screening for me of the movie, which he did. And they set up a screening just for me, myself. The projectionist was on one side of the wall. I was on the other side of the screen. And he ran this independent feature film. He played, Liam Neeson played a priest in a reform school for boys reform school. And I thought he did a terrific job. And when the film was finished, I opened up the door to the projectionist booth, the room, went in to speak to them, and there was Liam Neeson. He was sitting there watching me with the projectionist the entire length of the feature film, see what I thought about him. Well, it was love at first sight with the two of us, and I eventually took him on for representation. I brought him to the United States. He, being a foreigner from Great Britain, he was an alien and didn't have the right to work in the United States under the governmental laws, U.S. government laws. So I sponsored him through our company with the Immigration and Naturalization Service in order for him to get the right to work in the United States. That was worth $1 million to him. He was thrilled with that
because he could, yeah.
And so now he could work in the United States. And I took him on for representation, and again, the rest is history.
And the rest is history. Now, Kerry Washington.
Well, Kerry Washington was a result of. I actually didn't discover her. I was one of her agents. I had a company. I had several agents working for my company, and we all worked together. And she was someone who it was my associates did most of the work for her, but I entered into her life and took an interest and introduced her to various and sundry motion picture people and television people, and eventually she ended up on Scandal, as you know.
Yes,
and that was a success for her. She's still that was many, many years ago. She still maintained her presence even up to today. Today, she's still very popular.
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. And I met her mom and dad. She was so proud to introduce me to her mom and dad. Anyway, I could go on and on and on.
I have one last one, because this is a guy that I'd like to interview at some time because I like his politics, and that's Jason Alexander.
Jason Alexander was a fellow who I found. I put him to work in a television commercial. I saw him in New York, off Broadway, working in a show. He had a great comedic talent, and I put him to work in a television commercial for Western Union, and he did the commercial. He earned, as he said to me, earned more money than he'd ever earned in his lifetime. And he said, I must admit that we represented him, and I represented him for commercials, radio and television commercials. I did not represent him for his work in motion pictures and television and theater. He had a different agency for that. That's common in the business. You can have agents for different specialized areas of the business. But he and I became good friends. We are still good friends to this day. He's made more money in commercials than he's ever made in his life. And if you were to call him today and say, Harry Abrams, he says, Harry Abrams, my God Almighty, he's my savior. Anyway.
Well, look, we got to close this up. So let me ask you to do me one favor. Why, tell folks what you believe they can get out of, let me get the right name. Let's do launch, not lunch. Let's do launch. A Hollywood agent dishes on how to make your business a career takeoff. What can somebody learn from that book?
Well, that book is the inspiration for that book. I'm glad you asked that question. Was in my career and as I worked professionally over the years, I would encounter various and sundry people who had gone on, graduated from college, maybe even had a master's degree in business, and went on to a particular career path. Common in this area were lawyers, attorneys, and they would find that after and not only attorneys, but professional people, after a year or two or three of doing what they're doing, they had came to the conclusion they had not um, they had not chosen the right career path, and they were still young, and they wanted to change their career direction as to what they were going to do for the rest of their life. And many of these, I would encounter these people regularly, and many of them were interested in the entertainment industry, but they had no particular artistic talent. They weren't an actor, a performer, or a director, or a writer, but they wanted to be involved from a business standpoint. And I introduced them with this book to the business of artist representation of the entertainment industry, which is an unusual profession. One doesn't meet many talent agents as they walk through life. And so that was the inspiration for putting that book together. That was one of the major inspiration. But the other inspiration, of course, is how to launch an acting career as well. And as one reads through these pages, a couple hundred pages, you learn, if you want to change your career path and want to get in the entertainment industry and artist representation, it would be something attractive to you. That's one thing you'll learn from the book. Each chapter carries a wonderful story, wonderful guidance and direction to plan a career. And the other is for an actor or an actress, what they have to do in order to get themselves seen, heard, become a star, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, let me tell you, Harry, that is something we can probably promote now, even as you've written it for people who may want to get in the business side of entertainment or be actors themselves. The idea, one of the first things you mentioned was that if you think you've chosen a career that you didn't really think was right for you, there are options for you to move on. Never stay stuck to where you don't want to be. There are options, as you did yourself, moving from Indiana to LA and becoming the success that you've become. I want to thank you so kindly, Harry, for giving us this time, giving us a little bit of your story, which I find quite intriguing. And thank you so kindly for having been on Politics Done Right.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Egberto. Nice to meet you. I enjoyed it immensely. Have a great day.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.
Guess where I'm from? I'm from Panama. And I know the tribulations that Panama went through. In fact, a little secret. I think it was in 1821 or somewhere around there. Panama, I believe, got its independence from Spain. So it was an independent country for a while. And then it joined Gran Colombia, which was a conglomerate of different South American countries. And it eventually became a part of Colombia, the actual country Colombia. And while there was Colombia, they were building this canal. The French was building the canal. De Lesseps was, I think, the guy sort of in charge. And they failed miserably. Why did they fail? Because building a sea level canal in Panama is not like building a sea level canal that this company did in the deserts in Saudi Arabia, where they built the Suez Canal, right? They just had to dig sand, open it up, and sea level between the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean Red Sea, I believe. But anyhow, Well, America wanted to build a canal, and Colombia said, "No, señor, no vas a construir un canal aquí. You're not going to build a canal here." So they got a few rebels in the province of Panama, which was a part of Colombia, and I don't remember the president. I think it was Roosevelt, put a battleship in front of my city called Colon, right? And said, "Okay, you are now an independent country, and we are going to sign a treaty," of which no Panamanian signed. Of course, it was Bonavaria, the person who signed the. I'm taking this off the top of my head from my elementary school, so if I get a few little things wrong, it'll just be a few tiny things wrong. But Bonavaria signs the treaty, the Panama United States Treaty for the Panama Canal, where it granted. I don't understand the language. It said 99 years in perpetuity. America got to get the canal, build this canal, and on both sides have 5 miles on either sides of the canal that they control. They ran the canal zone as an apartheid state. I kid you not. The canal zone was an apartheid state within the state of Panama. But I tell you, no matter what, of course, Americans are there. Standard of living is higher. So Panamanians flock to work for the American governments, of which my dad was one of them as well. You know, it's like, hey, if you're working for Pan Canal, the Panama Canal Company, right, you make quite a bit more money and, you know, all that good stuff. But still, the Panamanians living on the canal zone, they lived in substandard housing. We lived in substandard housing on the canal zone. So a lot of folks that lived on the canal zone, Panamanians that is, they also had homes, what we call in the Republic, what means in Panama away from the canal zone, which we did as well. The idea here being that we had America come help the creation of this country, Panama, to build a canal to create an apartheid state within the country of Panama. Now, throughout between 1914 and 1970 something, there were riots upon riots upon riots because, again, we had this apartheid state within Panama. In fact, on the canal zone, the only flag flown for the longest time was the American flag. So here you are. Think about another country coming into Texas, take Austin, and say, we are going to hold on to Austin in perpetuity. We're going to have a police force, a fire force, a judicial system. And not only that, we're going to prevent Texans, born Texans, from being able to go into the canals, into Austin. If we don't allow them into Austin, unless by permission, unless they work there, etc. An apartheid state within Texas. That's how it was in Panama. Let me tell you a few truths, however. Like I said, we lived on the canal zone. And as a Panamanian living on the canal zone, I didn't realize a whole lot of this. I know that the Panamanians lived in one section while the Americans live in better homes and they had better things, etc. But the schools that we had, while they were made of wood, right? And their schools, all of it was made of concrete. You know, that's the standard building procedures. Our teachers, most of them Panamanian West Indians, were exceptional. And we fought and we fought and we fought to get equal rights on the canal zone. And I remember my class was the first class on the canal zone to graduate from the unified canal zone schools. In other words, we had an apartheid school system too. The Panamanians went to one school system. The Americans went to another school system. We got substandard books, substandard everything, except our teachers were excellent. And on the American side, they had the tools, the microscopes, and all these great things. And we wanted those things too. We worked for the canal zone. And we finally got it. My class, again, was the first full class to graduate out of that. And let me just tell you, I remember our teachers on the canal zone, the Panamanian teachers, grilled us and told us that we had to be an example because the reasons these folks, I remember them telling us, don't want us there is they think we can't compete. They think we are substandard. They think we speak funny. They think that we cannot do X, Y, and Z. and our first class in Cristobal High School. And the Panamanians came out with the first 14, I think it was the first 12 or 14 physicians. I don't remember exactly. This wasn't because the Panamanians were smarter. This was because the Panamanians had to be prepared and had something that they had to prove because they were treated as less than the other. That's what happened. They were treated that way. I want to break off from this little commentary a bit and say one thing. When you see somebody like Tiger Woods excel, when you see somebody like the NBA players excel, etc., 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 and you have what I called those who would want to say there's something genetic of these performances, etc. You know what made those performances? It's amazing the things that racism and prejudice can do, because you have to work twice as hard than the majority population. It turns out naturally that you have to excel. But going back to, so I mean, I want people to get that in the head. What we don't generally have is an even playing field. We have a skewed playing field. And anytime we try to unskew that playing field, whether we use things like DEI or other things to say, let's correct the injustices of the past, something always rears its head to get rid of that necessity, that reality. Now we come back to Panama. In 1964, we had these big riots. 1964. Then my old man worked for the the American Fire Department on the Canal Zone, but he lived in Colon. Okay, that meaning you cross over into the Canal Zone to work. When you're done working, you go back to live in Panama, in the city, in the country proper. And when they had the big riots in 1964, my father participated in hosing people out to prevent them from really invading the Canal Zone, because it was going to be bloodshed in the Canal Zone. And he was part of the Panamanian groups in the fire department that actually helped maintain the peace. But that also put a bullseye on a lot of these guys, because a lot of these guys were told, don't come back to Colon, because in effect, you hosed us down to protect the peace. And that is the only way certain particular groups of folks actually got what they called quarters. I mean, it's amazing how they did this, to live on the Canal Zone. So there's a whole lot of history in this little apartheid state created by the United States in Panama, and that bears mentioning. To solve this problem, Omar Torrijos Herrera, the person that the American government loves to call the dictator of Panama. By the way, before Omar Herrera, we had plutocrat after plutocrat, oligarch after oligarch, some rich oligarchs that, Panamanians they were. We used to call them Rabi Blancos, that controlled all the sources of production in the country. Everybody else lived the substandard lives. These guys, the president of the country, each time that got elected, Arnulfo and all these other guys, they were sanctioned by the not sanctioned, but, that's who the United States wanted as government. Finally, in 1970 something, I don't remember, like 76 or so, the overthrow occurred. The dictator, Manuel Noriega, Omar Torrijos Herrera, took over the country and forced a treaty. Things were just getting out of hand, so forced a treaty that turned over the canal and the Canal Zone back to Panama to have full control, a sovereign state. Carter signed that treaty. It was called, I think, the Torrijos-Carter Treaty, that gave the canal to Panama and the corresponding military bases, because America built 14 military bases in Panama, as well as some other entities, the Gargas Hospital and these other things. I want to give you a little corollary here. America has a small, tiny base in Italy, and they were paying tens of millions of dollars for that base in Italy. They had multiply 10 miles by 50. They had approximately 500 square miles of a apartheid state they created in Panama. And for that, they gave Panama something like, I don't remember the number, don't quote me, but it's somewhere between 1.5 and 13 million bucks to rent, right? For that apartheid state, that's what they paid America every year. Paid Panama every year. Panama made nothing from the billions that's been made passing ships through the canal to save them from going through the southern tip of South America. They got very little. They got that too. But places like Italy and France, the spaces that America rent, they give away hundreds of millions of dollars. So that is the disrespect with which Panama has always been treated by the American government. Actually, it was an American corporation created by the American government to run the canal that had its own private apartheid government. Again, I have to admit, while I lived down there in Panama on the canal zone, I never was educated in politics to understand the political dynamics. You just existed. You understood this is how things work. And it wasn't, as far as you're concerned, it's neither bad or good. It's just the way it is. It's just as I matured, became older, a lot of things I would kind of hear my father say, I understood it now in a different light. And it's a shame that I didn't understand a lot of this till I moved to the United States, right? But I understood it. So after December 31st, 1999, big day in Panama. At that point, all of Panama became a sovereign country. No more apartheid state in the center of Panama. And by the way, again, that apartheid state occupied the center of Panama for its entire 50-mile diameter, not diameter, but, a punto to cross from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. There's a whole 10-mile gap that Panamanians have to cross if they want to go from one side of Panama to the other. Like I said, a lot of times you don't understand the predicament you're in until you look at it from the outside. Now we come to today. There are a lot of issues with the canal right now. We have climate change. Panama has a big rainforest that normally collects all the water from the rain season, and they throw it into two big lakes, Gatun Lake and Madden Lake. And these lakes have been running pretty low because, again, climate change has brought less rain during the rainy season to Panama. And because of the way the canal functions, the canal is a very ingenious level of engineering, because what it does is it creates a huge lake in the middle of the country, and it uses locks to pull water, bring the ships up to the lake level. The ship goes across the lake in the middle of Panama where it's mountainous. So they use big valleys in the lake. They fill big valleys up with lakes, Gatun Lake. And they only had to dig a trench 8 miles long called the Culebra Cut. Used to be called Gaylord Cut, now Culebra Cut. And they cut through mountains for only 8 miles, whereas otherwise they would have had to cut 30, 40 miles of mountains if it weren't for bringing the ship up to the top of the mountain in that lake and move across. Now, after they did that, again, we have problems with rain last year and for the last several years. So if you believe, like America believe in, I don't, but America believes in this thing called capitalism. I call it's the biggest theft really on the labor and resources of the world. And I think that is easily proven if you want to be honest about it. But that's what America believes, and that's a standard of the Western world, including Panama. Now we have a shortage of water to pass the ships through the canal in high numbers. So what happens when there are shortages? Whenever there are shortages, the price of the commodity or the price of the service goes up. So less ships can pass through the canal while we had water problems, because again, the lakes are not peak full, etc. So you can only pass X amount of ships now. So the prices naturally go up for the lesser amount of ships that can have access to this Panama Canal. Trump doesn't like that. Trump wants all other countries to disregard what America asks of its own. Trump wants the other countries to simply absorb the cost that America would never absorb. And because the rates to pass through the canal has gone up while this shortage occurs, and because it is likely to go up the next year because of inflation, and to mitigate and to create other resources to maybe not have this water shortage as bad the next time around, Donald Trump is threatening to go into Panama and take back the canal. That's what he says. Take back the canal. In other words, disregard the treaty. Disregard the Torrijos-Carter Treaty that returned the land and the canal to Panama. I mean, this brings back memories. We call ourselves a country, a body of laws. That's what we say. We believe in laws. We follow our treaties, all this good stuff. But you know what? When Torrijos-Carter signed that treaty, Panamanians should have always known one thing. Go speak to the Cherokee. Go speak to the Indians about the Black Hill Mountains, or the Black Hills, or the Black Mountain. I don't remember what it's called. As soon as these guys found gold, they got the American military to come in and kick out the natives and take back the land that by treaty they had rights to. I mean, treaty after treaty after treaty, we break. We are the ones who withdrew from the Paris Accords. We are the ones who withdrew from the Iran nuclear treaty. It wasn't the other way around. At some point in time, we are going to have to lead by example at some point in time. But if Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, think that folks are going to stand by and watch him, as Howard mentioned before, the greatest grifter on the planet, jump into Panama and claim to take back this canal, he has something else in store. Because as opposed to how many of us were back in the 70s, back in the 80s, back in the 90s, where we just let things happen, that will never, ever happen again.
We spend a lot of time deconstructing the news, trying to parse it into a form that everybody can understand. We try to find those little nitpicks where it flies above the fray, etc. If you really like these videos that we do, I want to ask a big favor. Please go ahead. Number one, subscribe to our channel. And number two, please join if you can. Thank you so kindly for watching. Keep watching. Please remember to share. We must populate the entire internet with our progressive message, a message that we know is what most Americans say that they want. So help us, please join.